Today, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Baland Jalal, who's a researcher at Harvard University and visiting researcher at Cambridge University, one of the world's leading experts on sleep paralysis. It's really great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, David.
So, sleep is such an interesting field because it seems to me it's difficult to study it without affecting one's sleep, in the sense that many of the settings in which sleep is studied, like sleep labs, for example, are very unnatural situations to do something that most of us do every day, which is sleep while being observed, sleep with electrodes on, etc. It seems that it's difficult to get great data for that reason. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, bringing somebody into a sleep lab and hooking them up with these electrodes and things like that and having them sleep in a sleep lab is obviously not as, useful as the home environment where you naturally sleep and things like that. So I agree, it is difficult, but nonetheless, it's doable. But I agree, we don't have that. So it's a bit of a tricky thing in that way.
Let's maybe start and talk a little bit about sleep paralysis. Now, to some degree, in certain phases of sleep, we are paralyzed in the sense that we might be dreaming of taking some physical action, and you aren't taking that physical action in the real world. You might be punching someone in a dream, but your body is not going out and punching into the air. And that's a good thing when it happens in the correct times. Is that right?
That's right, David. So each night we cycle through these 90-minute cycles of sleep. And if you sleep 8 hours, I hope you do, then you have like maybe four of these blocks. And during one of these stages, you go through something called REM sleep. And during REM sleep, you have these bizarre, lifelike, crisp dreams, the ones where you see yourself on the moon wrestling with an alligator and then having tea with the queen. Everything is just messed up. So during these dreams, you certainly don't want to act these dreams out and hurt your sleeping partner. So your brain, essentially, the lower part of the brain paralyzes your entire body. And so, yeah, you have this paralysis each night, that you go through pretty much.
Now, when we talk about sleep paralysis as a phenomena and condition, what we're really talking about is outside of REM sleep, the body remaining paralyzed.
Well, sleep paralysis is basically this, like so you are in this paralysis state during this REM stage of sleep, and then suddenly parts of the brain that has to do with sort of wakefulness centers of the brain, cortical regions, they become prematurely activated. So you start waking up in a way, even though you're still paralyzed in REM. So it's a dysynchrony to the architecture of REM, whereby your brain suddenly switches so it's awake and sleeping at the same in the same way at the same time. So you have this clash of wakefulness and REM paralysis occurring at the same time. So that what sleep paralysis is.
How common is that?
About 20% of the population have experienced sleep paralysis at least one time, but then you have maybe 1 or 2% that have it more chronically. So they will have sleep paralysis, 2 or 3 times a day or a week or, 5 or 6 times a month. So it is really, but at least one well, at least 20% have had it in one, at least once in their life.
Is it a bad thing in the sense of is it a condition that we try to treat, I guess is the question?
Right. So if you have it just like a regular person, you have it, once or twice in your life, and indeed it can be scary. I mean, you wake up paralyzed, you think you might, think you're going to die perhaps, and then there's a ghost in your room because typically you hallucinate during these experiences, and so that is terrifying and frightening. But it's not, pathological in its own right, right? It's just, scary and things like that. But if you have it chronically, it becomes a parasomnia, so it's a fearful thing that keeps occurring in your life. And our research suggests if you give this too much meaning and you say, this is a demon chasing me, I'm being possessed, and things like that, which can occur in certain cultures, well, then potentially it could even lead to things like anxiety and maybe even trauma from just, being overwhelmed by this paralysis and having these, scary hallucinations.
Let's talk a little bit about the dream component of sleep. There is
Yep.
so much literature going back so long with different ideas about dream meaning and dream interpretation. There are one side is it's completely random. There's no connection whatsoever between dreams and what's happening in the real world for you. There's another side, which is no, the dreams are a direct response to things that are taking place in someone's life, and there can be sort of specific meaning assigned to them. Let's start with maybe some of the common dream tropes that a lot of people report. So, like falling in a dream and waking up before you hit the ground is a very common theme. Teeth falling out can be another common one. The idea that you're kind of running or walking, but it's almost like you're in molasses, like it's very, very difficult to move. You know, there's these common themes that a lot of people seem to experience. So it seems like it would follow that there must be some meaning to those at least.
Absolutely. There's a pattern, right? So let's take them one by one. So you mentioned the tooth falling out. So that seems to be due to sort of so all of us, right, and at a certain age when we're children have teeth literally falling out of our mouth. And imagine this must be very anxiety provoking. So obviously you will lay down memories of this fear and anxiety that will remain with you for many people the rest of their lives, but they can't really, pin down like, why do I have this dream? Why am I terrified of my dreams falling out? Well, there was a period in our life where our teeth were, loose and were literally falling out. So yeah, so you lay down these memories in the memory parts of your brain, and then you will dream about them often. Another very common dream is like being late for an exam. Even though, I mean, you're 40, 50, 60, you're running your business, but
Yep.
you're dreaming about being late for an exam, right? So that's a common one. Then you mentioned the thing where you're trying to, run, you can't get away. What's going on there? Well, it turns out your dream during REM sleep, during this dream stage of sleep, has a certain physiology and a certain neural pattern. And one of the signatures of this is that the motor part of the brain, sort of this part of the brain that has to do with movement, is not fueled by the chemicals it needs to move. Okay, and but the emotional part of the brain is hyperactive. That's a chemical called acetylcholine, and the emotional parts of the brain are overactive. So you have this clash between your motor part of the brain, the movement part of the brain being weakened, and then the emotional part of the brain, the instinctual part of the brain being overactive. And that manifests as this dream where you are running, but you are really slow, right? You're in quicksand, and then this monster is chasing you. So that is an example of that. And what you mentioned, another one?
The falling one, just falling and waking up before,
Oh, the falling.
before you hit
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ground.
I think that's unclear, but probably because we used to sleep in high places, right? Like trees and things like that. So it makes
Huh.
sense to have a reflex of, being able to catch yourself before you fall. So perhaps your brain has remnants of this in its, memory centers. But, in short, your brain has a certain chemistry during the dream stage, right? So like noradrenaline, this chemical that allows us to focus in on being really focused, is absent during the dream stage. And that means things are like spacey. You can't really focus on a specific thing, but it's more like the world is bizarre and time is just, and places are all warped. So that's a signature of that, or for example, there's no logic or a coherent story. And that's because the logical part of the brain is not working. So there is this neural signature that defines what you then see, but then you have memories and things like that, which you will sort of pull in and sort of color the dream. So if you live in a certain way, you will dream about monsters relevant to your culture. So you have all these elements. In fact, even your environment, if you're in a cold room, you might, dream of being in Iceland and, you're having a fight with a ice bear or something, like with a, so certainly your environment, your physiology and all that influences your dream in that way.
There are so many academic texts and research now about sleep problems, and sleep problems are so common, particularly in Western countries for sure. And there's so many different aspects to this. There's the hypnotic type medications like Ambien and Lunesta that some people take. There's the sleep hygiene aspect of you've got to, get off screens at least an hour before going to bed. Don't be doing things in your bedroom other than sleeping. Associate the bedroom with sleep. All of it, turn lights down. There's kind of that aspect of it. There's the more kind of like natural cures type side, which often involves herbs or supplements or apple cider vinegar and kind of all these different things. All of this different stuff, clearly because we recognize that sleep is important and we do better when we've slept well. Is there
Wonderful.
some kind of overarching takeaways right now that you think are the most important when it comes to getting good sleep?
It's a good question. So I would say sleep at the same time and wake up at the same time every day. Your brain has this biological clock that really defines when you feel tired and how you get quality sleep. So that's one thing. The light issue is a huge thing. Avoid bright light late in the night. I mean, we know this, but it's very important to stick to this. Those are important to remember. Stress and anxiety is just the key one. I mean, if you have stress and anxiety during the day, your brain just can't turn off. The emotional parts of the brain will be overactive, and that will spill over into the, sleep state, into sleep, and will just not allow you to have deep quality sleep. So those are the main thing. So light, exercise is so easy. You just exercising, especially you can even do things like walking. That will help you get more deep sleep. The stage 4 before REM sleep. That's important, sort of for growth and just cellular repair and stuff like that. So exercise is a great one. I would say those are the main pillars. And also, if you can sleep consistently. I mean, we did not, but there's some studies were done over in Boston, David, where they showed that if you sleep a regular amount of hours each night, let's say even 6 or 7, that's better than sleeping like 8, 9, and then 6 and 5, and then 8 and 10. And so having a regular, amount of sleep each night is better than just, going crazy in the weekends with like 12 hours.
There are some people, I mean, famously Donald Trump, who says that for his whole life, he's basically only slept about 4 hours a night and that's enough that he feels fine. I
Mm,
know, including from Matthew Walker's research, that there
right.
is a range of what is sort of like the natural correct amount of sleep for people, but I've not seen anything empirical that suggests that the human body can function properly with an extended period of 4 hours a night of sleep. Can you talk about that at all? Are there people who genuinely are fine with that amount of sleep?
I was surprised when I learned there actually is. So there's a genetic, mutation in a rare subset of people. So it's very rare. It's probably not you and I, David,
Okay.
unfortunately. It's certainly not me, but there is a rare breed of people that can sleep 4 or 5 hours. So, and they will feel rested and they just sleep more efficiently. They have this mutation, and perhaps, in enough time, we'll all have this mutation if it's advantageous. But certainly there is seems to be this genetic mutation of people who sleep very little. But I was quite surprised when I learned that this seems to be the case. And there's some folks in California doing research on this very curious topic. Yes, but it seems to be true.
Have you studied a lot or read a lot about the idea of the biphasic sleep schedule? There's this idea that back when we had to stoke fires in the middle of the night, humans would, sleep 3 or 4 hours, be up for an hour or two, and then sleep another 3 or 4 hours. And it seems to be the sort of source of a lot of debate because on the one hand, it does appear as though there was a point at which it would have made sense based on circumstances, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or healthy thing to be doing, right?
I think the research on this is emerging. It could be that biphasic sleep, in the way you mentioned. I mean, certainly many people used to sleep like that, with their rituals at night and then going back to sleep. And it seems like it could potentially be good that you get more efficient sleep in that way. But the research, I would say, is emerging. Another, just element to this is also the whole idea of siesta time and sleeping during that time. And it seems also there might be a biological advantage of doing that. The fact that you will feel tired by noon and sleeping for those hours could potentially help. And even napping can be very, very refreshing and, sometimes even compensate for hours of sleep. But I think the research on that, at least from my knowledge, is not 100% clear, and certainly not with the biphasic sleep. But I wouldn't rule it out. It could be that it's you get more, for your more bang for the buck by sleeping in that way. It could be.
You've talked about kind of like the natural sleep schedules of people, there's quite a bit of research that throughout our lives, the natural wakefulness and sleepiness schedule kind of shifts. And one of the big areas of controversy with this is the time that school starts for different kids.
Yeah.
And when I was in high school, the first class started at 7:35 a.m., which
Mm.
was completely counter to my natural schedule, which was to be up until 12:30 or 1 in the morning Now I get up far earlier. That's a schedule that now would work much better for me. Is there something to this idea that much school is starting way too early?
Absolutely. So there's a genetic component to when you want to fall asleep. Like there's a chronotype in terms of like we have our genetic, preference in terms of when we want to sleep and want to, whether you want to be night owls or not. And so yes, for a lot of people, they will just naturally be night owls. They will be inclined to sleep very late and wake up later. And so for those folks, it's a problem because you're starting school that early, you will exclude these people in that way. You won't have their full brain capacity. You be using that. So it is something. But I'll say something. In my entire life, David, I was sleeping maybe at 2 or 3 a.m. That's just my natural thing. But the last 4 years, I've been sleeping at 10 p.m., so I've totally shifted how I sleep as well, and it just works better. So sometimes, even though you think you're a night owl by nature, you might in fact be somebody who's not. So
No, me too. I mean, I tried, I also saw this natural shift where because of my schedule, 10:15 and I was just getting into bed. And I thought to myself, I used to kind of be a night owl. Let me see what happens if I try to just stay up a little later and get up a little later. It felt very unnatural where I was just finding it was, 11 and I was just like, I should just be in bed right now. This doesn't feel like it's my schedule any longer.
100%, that's what happened to me, and I was surprised. I thought I was genetically just doomed to be somebody who has sleep at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
But I sleep much earlier and I feel better.
The work in the field is fascinating. We've been speaking with Dr. Baland Jalal, who's a researcher at Harvard University and also a visiting researcher at Cambridge University. Really a pleasure having you on, and I appreciate your time today.
My pleasure, David.